All right, good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming. Anyone a teacher and today was their last day of school? Anyone? I was impressive. That's impressive. Anyone's coming here on their last day, decide to do a little extra continue education on, the last day of school or the second to last day of school. So a quick little note about the clock hours. So families, if people are any educators or school personnel here or at any of the other teleconferencing sites that are tuning in, tonight's talk on executive functioning needs to be paired with last month's talk on sensory processing. Okay, so any questions about that, I'll be outside afterwards and we can kind of chat about that. And we'll get started, and we're very excited to have Rachel Montague and Rosalind Oti come and talk to us about executive functioning skills in children with autism. So I'm going to do a little introduction to each of them. Rachel, to start with, she's a clinical psychologist at the Seattle Children's Autism Center. She earned her doctorate in clinical psychology from Seattle Pacific University and completed an internship in the developmental disabilities track at UCLA and completed her postdoc fellowship at Seattle Children's. She works at the Seattle Children's Autism Center, completing assessments and provides individual and group therapy at the Autism Center. And Roz is also a clinical psychologist at the Seattle Children's Autism Center. She attended graduate school and earned her doctorate, at the University of Michigan, and then joined us at Seattle Children's for her internship and postdoc. She's part of our adult transition team and provides assessment and therapy. So any questions, these guys will let you know about how to ask questions and those types of things. We'll be ending around 8:30, but anyone have any questions, please let us know. Thanks.
All right. So thank you for joining us this evening to talk about executive functions. This is an area that Rachel and I feel very strongly about because we feel like this is an area that a lot of people struggle with, and it has huge implications for daily living skills, academics, vocational work. So we're excited to share what we know with you, and hopefully you'll have some ideas moving forward. Toward the first half is just some information about what they are, and then the second half are some ways that they're addressed in intervention and therapy. So I'm Rosalind Oti, Rachel Montague. Great. And about question asking, it's fine with us if you guys have questions, feel free to ask them as they come up. If there start to be a lot of questions, we may have you hold them just so we can get through some more information. But initially, we'll see how it goes, and feel free to jump in if you want to.
All right. So we're gonna just start off with a little experiment. I know it's Thursday evening, time to kind of wake up your brains. Okay. So here's the deal. So we're going to ask you to solve this riddle, all right? You ready? Okay. So even at satellite sites, we want you to participate as best you can. Grab a piece of paper if you want. So I have a 5-scoop ice cream cone. Okay. Each of my 5 scoops is a different flavor of ice cream. The 5 flavors are blueberry, chocolate, strawberry, vanilla, bubblegum. You don't know what my ice cream flavors are from top to bottom. I'm saying this fast on purpose. However, there are some clues to see if you can figure out what flavors are from top to bottom. So try to figure this riddle out. You ready? First clue, the bottom flavor has 10 letters. Second clue, vanilla touches chocolate and blueberry. And vanilla is below the chocolate scoop but above bubblegum. Go ahead. See if you can solve that. I see a few people scribbling down. Maybe some people are doing the mental math here. Couple details I should tell you. I'm allergic to nuts, by the way, and they were out of salted caramel, which is really my favorite flavor. Anybody have a solution? Any brave soul figure out the order? Anyone start to figure it out and got stuck along the way?
Or did your brains just turn off?
Yeah, did you stop listening? It's possible. Yeah, I see some nodding. Okay. Okay, so the answer, if you're really curious here, is it's chocolate, vanilla, blueberry, bubblegum, and strawberry with the 10 letters at the bottom. Okay, so if you didn't solve it, how come you didn't? Anybody want to venture? Yeah?
Well, for me it was time.
Time. Okay. Oh, okay, so if I'd given you a few more seconds, you might have figured it out. You're maybe on your way. All right. Anything that made it difficult? It was fast, yeah. I kind of taxed your attention. I probably taxed your memory by remembering what I had said first, second, third. The flavors I specifically said really quickly. How many of you didn't hear everything I said? Couple, okay. How many of you forgot some of the details? Maybe by the time I got to the third sentence, you'd forgot what I had said already. Okay. Anybody forget what I had asked you to originally do to solve the top to bottom score, like the instructions? Okay. Did anyone not know where to start? Like, how do I even get started on this riddle? Okay. Anyone just get frustrated and give up and just listen to me jabber on? Yeah, okay, good. All right. And some people might have come up with some combinations but kind of forgot what they'd already solved and had to kind of go back and refigure out maybe somewhere where they were in the process. That's another part of solving this riddle. Feelings-wise, anyone feel anxious about that task? I know it's an auditorium, but I could maybe instill a little anxiety in you guys. Anybody feel a little frustrated, irritated, helpless? Okay. And then I interrupted you with extra information, and that was purposely kind of taxing your brain there. But this is a warm-up example because it taxes a lot of those skills that we're going to be talking about tonight that are involved in executive functioning. Yeah. Ooh. All right. All right. Sounds like microphones are off. Good. Okay. All right. So that was your warm-up. Hope your brain's ready for all the information we're going to talk about. Okay? All right. So now we'll kind of let you off the hook. We're going to show a short kind of warm-up video that we thought was really good. It's from the Center for Brain Development at Harvard. Harvard's always a good place to go to for information here. So here we go.
Science tells us that brains, minds, are built, not born. And at the center of this dynamic architecture are a set of skills called executive function and self-regulation.
Children's self-regulation and executive function are key ingredients in their lifetime performance. It's not just about learning language or learning numbers or learning colors.
We have to be able to work effectively with others, with distractions, with multiple demands. These actually are skills that contribute to the productivity of the American workforce.
Just look at your shapes. What should you have done next?
Educators, I think, are looking for just this sort of thing. And when we describe what we mean by executive function, they say, yes, that's it. That's exactly, the problem. These kids, they can tell me these rules, but they can't actually use them.
What's this?
A toolbox.
A toolbox.
What is executive function?
The safety goggles.
Safety goggles.
Probably the best way to think about it is sort of like an air traffic control system in the brain. Just like an air traffic control system has to manage lots of airplanes going on lots of runways and really exquisite timing and so on. A child has to manage a lot of information and avoid distractions. We really think of it as involving working memory and inhibitory control and mental flexibility. Take a situation where a child is having to take turns. So first of all, the child has to have inhibitory control. The child has to be able to stop whatever he or she is doing and let the other child take a turn.
Cute.
But when it's your turn again, you also have to remember what it is you're supposed to be doing. So that pulls on working memory. If the children who are taking the turns after you do something unpredictable, you have to be able to adjust what you're going to do next. And that requires mental flexibility. Children who are struggling with these capacities often look like children who just aren't paying attention, or children who are deliberately not controlling themselves.
If you don't have self-regulation, you act out and the teacher puts you in timeout, and so then you miss part of the learning that's going on, and then you are more upset because you're behind, and so you act out, and so you get this downward spiral.
How does executive function develop?
7 and plus 4.
In little children, and even in the infant and toddler years, you begin to see the roots of executive functioning skills. What's going on in our brains is unbelievably intricate and complicated.
The prefrontal cortex, or the front third of the brain, is important for executive function. But it's more than just prefrontal cortex. This region doesn't act alone. It's involved in controlling your behavior through its interactions with all other parts of the brain. The brain goes from a situation where you've got nearest neurons communicating very strongly with each other and ignoring the rest of the brain, to these widespread networks that are connecting these different areas. Executive function changes over the life course. It improves radically over the first few years.
I got a max prime.
It continues to improve throughout adolescence. It's not until early adulthood that you have the adult type networks that are very strongly activated that connect different brain regions together.
Let's take notes.
Also, we believe.
All right.
So we're going to go into a lot more detail about what they were talking about in the video. But I just wanted to clarify a few terms really quickly, just in case it wasn't clear in there, that when we talk about executive functions, or you hear the term executive functions, that's an umbrella term that refers to a bunch of different processes that are all related to emotional control and mental control, and just one's ability to plan and organize and achieve a goal. So I also wanted to just clarify that in our talk tonight, we're drawing from a lot of different research studies as well, and some of them we highlighted and referenced here. Most of that research has been done with individuals who don't have intellectual disability. However, that doesn't mean that individuals who do have intellectual disability don't have issues with executive function, or can't have issues with executive function. So it's just that we don't know as much about their executive functioning challenges because we just don't have the measures to assess it accurately. But the small amount of research that has been done in individuals with intellectual disability does suggest that they can also have additional challenges with executive functioning. So here you can see that under that broad umbrella of executive functions, some of those that were highlighted in the video are here, and then there's a range of other types, and Rachel's going to talk in more detail about what each of these specific types of executive functions refer to and what they look like.
All right. So the first one you actually heard in the video is called inhibitory control. And that's really the ability to think before you act or resist an urge to say or do something, right? So we call it kind of a prepotent response, like our urge to do something, and really you're trying to reduce your probability of actually responding. All right, so you saw a little girl in the video, or I can't remember which one, trying to grab the block and then like backing off, right? You saw her kind of consciously go and then say, oh, it's not my turn yet, right? That's inhibitory control. It's something that allows us time to evaluate the situation and how our behavior might impact it. So if she had grabbed the block from that kid, he probably would have yelped, and it might not have gone well. But being able to have that inhibitory control allows you more time to kind of process what could happen if you did a behavior. All right? So working memory, which you heard in the video too, is that what I like to call the mental whiteboard, right? It's the ability to hold information in memory while you're performing a complex task. So keeping information about all the scoops of ice cream in your mind, or where you are in the process of figuring out my little riddle as you're continuing to solve the problem. That's working memory. Emotional control is your ability to manage emotions in order to achieve goals, complete tasks, or control and direct your own behavior. All right, so like right now, or when people are presenting, oftentimes you have to kind of calm nerves, be able to use your brain, access your verbal information to give a talk. Kids with learning disabilities, for example, need to have a little bit more emotional control skills because often they experience more failure like in the classroom, right? Where they get feedback where they're not answering a question as well as they need to, or they get feedback that maybe they're incorrect. And so getting that kind of negative feedback could cause somebody to shut down. Somebody with well-developed emotional control would be able to kind of tap into that skill to kind of manage like, oh, maybe that didn't go so well, but I'm going to be able to tackle the next problem. Okay? All right. I personally like this example of Candyland. I don't know if you've played this recently. However, there's often times where you get almost to the end and you think you're going to win, and then you get sent back to like the gumdrop on the bottom. And then in order to want to keep playing and interact socially, you kind of have to manage that. So I like that Candyland example. Cognitive flexibility is a skill that involves your ability to kind of revise your plan, like get a plan B on board, to switch your strategy. Like something's not working, okay, I got to figure out another way to solve this problem. All right. You can do this in face of obstacles, setbacks. Maybe you got new information. Like if I give you more information about the scoops of ice cream, you'd have to kind of be flexible and say, oh wait, it wasn't blueberry, it was something else. You can also base flexibility based on monitoring how you're doing. If you notice you're making mistakes, your ability to use cognitive flexibility is to say, oh, I'm noticing that. I'm going to monitor myself and change my approach to maybe have things go better. So this is adaptability. This tends to be a really hard task for individuals on the autism spectrum. Okay. Sustained attention is just your capacity to maintain attention when situations are boring, right? So it's your ability to attend to something when it's not intrinsically motivating. So despite distractibility, despite fatigue, despite boredom, your ability to kind of sustain your mental efforts on something for a sustained amount of time. It also taps into your ability to build in your own rewards. Like if I can get through this math worksheet, I'm going to take a 5-minute break and listen to my favorite song or something. So that's a sustained attention skill. All right. Task initiation sounds like what it is, but it's your ability to begin projects without that undue procrastination. So many of you might say, oh, I might procrastinate, but in the end I get it done. But task initiation really is about, without undue procrastination, are you able to start a goal-directed task? All right? These are especially these non-preferred tasks like book reports, something like that. All right, planning is your ability to create a roadmap to reach a goal. It helps you make decisions about what's important to focus on, like the first several steps of a goal, and how to kind of weed out what's not important to focus on. So for example, when you're building a puzzle, huge puzzle, right? You want to plan to start with the edge pieces in the corners so you can kind of fill it in after that. That's a good example of planning. People might save money for something special and resist the urge to kind of spend it along the way. Or make interim deadlines on their way to reaching a long-term goal, right? So going to college, but what do you got to do to get there, right? First pass algebra, that kind of thing. All right. Organization. That's your ability to create and maintain systems to keep track of information and materials. A lot of schools, seems like more and more these days, have kind of school-wide systems for like binders and calendars and keeping track of things. Those are great because they're teaching, your later elementary, early middle school age kids about a task that's really developmentally appropriate for them to learn. All right. Time management. This is a tough one to learn. Right? So it's your capacity to estimate how much time something will take, right? Leaving enough time to do it. How to allocate your time. How to stay within those time limits and deadlines. Not to spend too much time perfecting it, right? Turning it in on time. Allocating your resources to do it. All right. Then we've got these last two. Goal-directed persistence and metacognition. These are really higher order cognitive tasks. Goal-directed persistence is really just your ability to follow through to reach a goal without distractions or competing interests. And metacognition is really your ability to kind of have a bird's eye view of how you're doing. Metacognition is really thinking about your thinking. It's that self-monitoring process. Evaluate how you're problem solving, whether it's going well. You might be asking yourself, how am I doing as you're going along? Or how did I do when I had that conversation with somebody earlier? And this is really that cause-effect thinking. And it develops really late in adolescence and probably early adulthood. Okay, so those are like all those systems that really make up the bigger umbrella of executive functioning skills. Just to kind of lighten things up from that long list, here's a cartoon. Can anyone think of maybe what skill this could be depicting? So this is I think a teacher noticing her student with a bubble over his head that's empty. And I think she notices he's not working yet. And she says, "Garth, I see by your bubble that you can't think of anything to write about." So this makes me think of actually a lot of them. Task initiation, right? Goal-directed performance, maybe even sustained attention. Planning, doesn't know where to start with his work. All right. And then our favorite dentist, the Menace. He says, "By the time I think about what I'm going to do, I already did it," right? So that's probably tapping into one of those first tasks, inhibitory control, right? Being able to resist an urge to do something. Who knows what it was? All right. This is just a graphic of our brain through development. On the left, it's about age 5 up to age 20. And really, this is just to remind us that executive functioning skills can continue to develop through the lifespan. And it begins around age 3 or 4. We can actually do tests, oftentimes in research, for kids down to age 3 or 4 for some of these executive functioning self-regulation tasks. And they continue to age 25. It's kind of late in adolescence and early adulthood that these are really solidified. And what happens is, you heard in the video, that your neurons start to prune. So the ones you use, the ones you practice, are the ones that stick around and are used. And that's what's happening in this graphic, where over time an individual practices using these processes and they become part of that advanced developed brain. All right. By the way, it doesn't mean you can't continue to learn compensatory strategies after age 25. There's probably lots of things you might do, like keep a calendar on your phone, to help you with organization and planning and all these things. Okay. And so Roz is going to talk to us a little bit more specifically about how these skills develop as we age.
Okay, so this is another timeline that shows how and when these skills start to really, we have milestones in these different skills across from infancy all the way up to adolescence and young adulthood. And you'll see that they start to become more complex as people get older. That self-monitoring up there in the adolescence and young adulthood really refers to that metacognition that Rachel was talking about. And then even from infancy, we see development of skills that really lay the groundwork for these later skills. So attentional control refers to ability to sustain attention on an activity or on an object, and then being able to switch attention. So being able to focus on one thing and then something else happens in your environment and switch back and then go back to the thing you're originally looking at. And those sorts of skills are necessary for development of these later executive functions. I also wanted to highlight another one that to really show how these build on each other. If you look in the middle there, between the end of preschool, early childhood, and then late childhood, you see representational flexibility and cognitive flexibility. And representational flexibility refers to one's ability to be able to look at an object and maybe use it for what it's intended for, and then be able to consider using it for something else. So this is what happens when we think about a child developing pretend play. They're able to, they might see, for example, a pot in the kitchen and start to pretend that it's a drum or it's a hat or it's shoes, they're walking in it. So then they're able to see that something can be used for something other than what it was intended. And when we think about cognitive flexibility and we think about the idea that you can have, there's a problem and you come up with one way to solve it, it's the idea that you realize there might be other ways of solving that problem. And we see that children who had difficulty with representational flexibility, or maybe that developed later than expected, then often also have difficulty with the cognitive flexibility, because those really build on each other. And I think you wanted to say something about the self-talk.
I was just going to say that, interestingly, you'll see that self-talk, development of self-talk is early in this scheme. And that wasn't listed as one of the executive functioning skills specifically, but we include it because it's really important in the development of executive functioning. Kids develop self-talk as early as toddlerhood, right, when they're starting to form sentences and phrase speech. You might hear them use self-talk to do things like self-regulate their behavior and their emotions. So you might hear kids say things like repeating a rule, like, oh, feet down, or kids in a grocery store cart in the checkout line might say, oh, I don't get a treat right now, right? And it's just them telling themselves what to expect or how to kind of manage what's going on around them. Some studies have suggested that for individuals with autism spectrum disorders that self-talk is really a delayed process, or it can be non-existent. Like it's not a practice that kids with autism kind of use as a go-to tool, which then later probably impacts some of the development of emotional control and response inhibition skills along the way. All right.
And it's kind of interesting because the self-talk is also a strategy that you can teach someone to do to help focus their attention or help them plan. Because sometimes when people can talk themselves through activities and tasks, then that helps them really focus their attention. And we'll actually talk about that a little more when we talk about the interventions. But so just because it didn't develop or is delayed in developing doesn't mean you can't still learn how to do it. All right, we're going to do another activity, and this time I really do want you to get out a piece of paper, and I'm not going to just have you try to do it in your head. So if you could write on the back of the presentation, or hopefully brought a scrap piece of paper. I'd like you to think of the goal of arranging a get-together with a friend. So that is your goal, and I want you to write down all of the steps that you can think of that you need to do in order to be successful at achieving your goal. I'll give you a minute or two to do that. So I'm going to show you what steps we came up with. And I thought that was coming through a speaker. So once we have, really quickly, I'll just say, first you have to decide who to call. You have to find a good time to call, text, or email them. You have to find their number, figure out how you're going to get in touch with them, plan what you want to do, and give them enough notice, gauge the other person's feedback about their interest in the activity, figure out where it'll happen, when it will happen. The how long to plan for actually refers to figuring out how much time you need before the event to figure out, be thinking about what you need to be doing beforehand to be prepared once it actually comes up. Figure out what materials you need, how you'll get there. You actually have to remember to go once you have this all set up. You have to get ready and you have to be on time. Well, I guess you don't have to be on time, but it would be nice to be on time. So how many of you didn't have all the steps? Did anyone okay, I'm not surprised. Did anyone have steps that we missed? Did anyone think of something that we forgot?
I wanted to know, like, if we were going to eat, like, I wanted to talk about the food, the transportation, some details about that maybe.
Oh, okay. So not just the where and when, but obviously the what. What are we doing and what exactly will that involve? Yeah.
I had quite a number of steps, and maybe I looked at one of the friends. I had a number of steps of looking at my calendar and sort of evaluating dates and figuring out what's going to work for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then getting, giving that information to her, and then assessing what, matching it up and deciding amongst all the possibilities.
Absolutely.
Dates.
Right.
What she said.
Yeah, so she, thank you for reminding me. It was pointed out that, and I think we were getting at that with the when to meet, but just in that one thing alone, there's a lot of steps involved. I mean, we could break down the how do you figure out when to meet into 10 steps. So she was saying, looking at your calendar, figuring out what works for you, figuring out what works for the other person, keeping in mind everything else you have going on. You want to make sure that whenever you've planned to meet up, you actually have that much time available. So yeah, good point. Even within these, there's a lot of steps that we could break down. And so thinking about the ones that you left off, how successful do you think you'd still be successful at reaching your goal if you didn't do some of the steps that you didn't write down? Would it still be successful? Everyone's still nodding their heads. So maybe you don't have to do all the steps.
Yeah. It took 2 brains and we took twice as much time.
Yeah. So just, and I guess now that you guys have heard about what the different executive functions are, is anyone brave enough to volunteer to identify what some of those executive functions might be that are being used in achieving this goal? Yes, task initiation. So finding a good time to call and actually calling them. Planning. Someone said planning over there. Absolutely. Anyone in the external sites?
Well, you might even have to say like inhibition control. Like if you want to get together on a Friday, maybe that won't be appropriate for that person, but you have to find an alternative.
Mm-hmm.
That maybe that inhibition control comes into play too.
Absolutely. Yep. And Rachel just said flexibility too. That kind of flexibility, being able to, if what you were initially proposing doesn't work, being able to consider other alternatives. And I would say emotional control in that sense too. You might have your heart set on something, but if they don't want to do it, you get feedback from them that they're not interested. Is that a question or? You guys can.
No, sorry.
Oh, okay. So as you can see, there are a lot of different executive functions that are involved. Pretty much in every step along the way, you have time management, you have goal-directed persistence. So if one or all of those are difficult for you, this task, no matter how much you want to get together with a friend, might be really hard for you to be able to do. So just to specifically highlight rigidity and cognitive inflexibility, like Rachel mentioned, cognitive inflexibility is one of the executive functions that are often impacted in autism spectrum disorder. And rigidity and cognitive inflexibility are actually part of the diagnostic criteria for autism spectrum disorder. is related to that difficulty with transitions, difficulty coping with changes in routine, and difficulty handling it when peers want to play a game differently than they're playing. And so individuals with ASD often have executive functioning challenges, but these are two, across the board, but these are two specific types of challenges that we frequently see. And how it might look in the day-to-day are, like I said, difficulty making transitions, tolerating changes in routine, generating new ways to approach a problem, accepting flexible interpretation of rules, accepting differing viewpoints, responding to the needs or interests of others. And so sometimes people interpret these behaviors as being related to just being controlling or stubborn or something else, when it's really related to executive functions and core deficits in ASD. Is there a question?
Hey, question.
Yeah.
I do. I have one. So my son was recently diagnosed with autism, and so would I say that he's autistic and has this learning disability, executive functioning, or does it co-occur at the same time, or does it occur most of the time in individuals that have autism? So, I mean, is that unique to people with autism only?
Great question, and that allows me to clarify. So, and my next slide is about executive functioning challenges in people who don't have autism spectrum disorder, because it definitely, other people with other diagnoses as well as people with no diagnoses sometimes have difficulty with executive functioning. And I should clarify that there's really no official diagnosis for there's no such thing as executive functioning disorder, although you might hear that term used. It's technically not an official diagnosis. But this is these are types of cognitive challenges that people with ASD often have, although not always. So, it's not an additional diagnosis if someone does have these challenges, but it's an important feature because it might just have a lot of implications for day-to-day functioning. All right. And so to get to your point about executive dysfunction in people besides those who have ASD, so in general we find, research has found that people with all kinds of neurodevelopmental disorders, which means things like ADHD, traumatic brain injury, Tourette syndrome, fetal alcohol syndrome, they usually frequently some kind of executive dysfunction is present, although again, not always. And there's been quite a bit of research comparing the different types of executive functioning challenges in people with ASD versus other disorders. And I just was going to highlight here for you ADHD and ASD. And you can see that there's some overlap. So people with ADHD often have difficulty inhibiting their responses, sustaining attention. Again, it's kind of part of the diagnostic criteria for ADHD. And they also have challenges with working memory. Whereas in ASD, we see the working memory challenges, we see the inhibition challenges. But in general, what's more common is that there's a broader range of executive functioning challenges. It affects more executive functioning domains, and frequently the cognitive flexibility piece is more significant than it is in ADHD. Any questions about that? Any questions before we move on to other things? Okay. Yeah.
Just have a comment. I think that it seems to me like in general, all of this is depending on a certain degree. It's like, I think like, if I read this, for example, if I think of myself, at some point in time, we all do have this, a certain situation, or depending on how the day was, how tired you are, and all of that, but all of them are up to a certain degree. And in terms of like, to start calling it a dysfunction part is because it has reached such a level that then impaired your function.
Right.
And there is kind of where the fluorescence
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I'll repeat her comment. That is a excellent point. What she was saying was that, and correct me if I miss something, but it seems that, difficulty with executive functions is really common, and probably all of us have times when we experience it at some point. But that might be dependent on what the specific situation is, how much other stress is going on in our lives, how tired we happen to be that day. Are we in an environment that's new and so maybe we're more nervous? So how much it's impacting us can really depend on a wide variety of factors. And really where it reaches the point of this executive dysfunction is when it reaches such a level that it happens kind of across the board and very frequently, and it's really significantly impacting our day-to-day lives. So that's a good point. Did I sort of summarize that appropriately? So I think, and I think that's a great point. And it is one of the helpful things about, I think, and useful things about helping people with executive functions is that we can all relate, because we've all experienced it when it doesn't happen for us, and then and we can imagine what it would be like if that happened all the time with in a range of different situations. All right, so
okay. So looking at the research, there's actually some positive outcomes that are associated with development of good executive functioning skills. Pretty much across the board, it's associated with positive social relationships. You could probably understand why. If you have good inhibitory control, if you're able to kind of manage your emotions, monitor your behavior, adjust your behavior to the situation, those are all involved in positive social interactions. It's highly related to academic achievement, especially math. Math tends to be really highly correlated with good executive functioning skills in early childhood. And adaptive functioning, which we talk a lot about in the autism clinic, right? So things like independent skills, self-care, self-help, independence in daily tasks, getting things done in a timely manner to get out the door, being on time, turning in your homework, all those things. And then navigating community resources, like there's a picture down here of a teenager looking at a bus schedule. There's an intervention out there called Tools of the Mind that one of the speakers in the video was involved in. There's a picture up here of these two preschoolers doing that activity, which kind of leads us into our intervention list here. But I love this picture because it's got a little girl on the right hand side holding a little ear, and she's got her lips pursed, and that's to remind her to be quiet because she's the listener. Her friend is taking a turn reading a book, and she's attending to that. So she's laying that good neural groundwork to practice that sustained attention, inhibitory control, right? She's remembering the rule, the working memory. Like, I'm supposed to listen right now. She's doing lots of functioning here that is good skill development for that. So that's just an example of a preschool intervention that's been developed. It's in research stages right now. That can help kids practice that. Is there a question from a site? Maybe not. Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry. I had a question.
Sure.
Real quick. So I know that we mentioned earlier that executive functioning is something that continues to develop well into young adulthood. So like right now I'm looking at that slide of the social skills and all of that, and he's still really delayed in those things. So it's reasonable to have the expectation that he'll be able to, gain that better adaptive functioning skills that, he's great in math, like you mentioned, but everything else is lacking. So, there's still that expectation that I should expect that of him, or in an IEP that we need to develop those skills.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and so yes, the fact is that development of these skills can occur for quite a while. It's really nice. It's not like things solidify like by age 5, and after that, there's nothing you can do. But besides gaining skill, there's other things that we're going to talk about that have to do with intervening when kids don't have some of these skills. So that would be things like not only teaching them compensatory strategies, like Roz had said, you can actually coach a kid to use self-talk, even if it's something they don't use on their own volition, right? So that's an example of that. Kids can learn strategies to compensate, like use the little tools that we might use as adults, like our external secretaries, our iPhone calendar reminders that tell us to do things, breaking down goals into different smaller tasks. Like I know there's thousands of apps out there these days. You can use those tools to kind of help you out. But also kind of choosing the right environment where maybe the taxation on your executive functioning skills is not as great. Maybe there's environments that can kind of reduce a lot of the noise around you to help you be more successful. So those are, it's skill development, yes, but there's other things too. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. All right. So there was something in the video, I don't know if you caught, but it was important for Roz and I to make sure we address this issue. And that is that sometimes kids that have difficulties with executive functioning skills can have kind of these secondary reactions where adults or people who don't really know what's going on might misunderstand their behavior and might think, oh, this kid's being really willfully disobedient or too rigid or controlling. And they may kind of impose this maybe negative connotation for what's going on with the kid's behavior. So we thought it's important to address this because we really feel like it's important to understand that there's a real skill deficit oftentimes for kids that really have dysfunction in this area where it's pervasive. It's happening across environments. That's when we know it's kind of at this clinical level, right? So here's an example. Maybe it's a noisy classroom and students are supposed to, wrap up your math assignment, get your materials out to start your writing, right? So, and get out yesterday's writing log and get started on it. So there's lots of executive systems that are probably required to do that. Shifting attention, right? Shifting activities, cognitive flexibility, working memory to remember those instructions. The teacher gave like 3 steps. Organizing their materials. Have you ever seen those desks that like pop open and like spill out? Plan their next move, right? Initiate their next goal-directed task. Hopefully the writing log, not something else that distracted them along the way. So what seems like could be a simple instruction, right, could really be a highly taxing demand for somebody who has to tap into all those skills. So here's what could happen, right? That demand has been placed, but the kid's executive functioning ability is insufficient for that demand. Thus, you get EF overload. A child might feel anxious, overwhelmed, frustrated, irritated, all those emotions you told me when I gave you the ice cream example. So it looks like they're not complying, and they're just disobeying. They might even have a behavioral outburst, like, I'm not doing this, right? Or get distracted and they're off in the corner, and you're like, Johnny, what did I tell you to do? So the adult may really respond as if the child is willfully avoiding or is disobedient for the task at hand. And imagine in a busy classroom with lots of kids, it might look like you want to punish that. So really, instead of teaching a skill to the deficit here, the child actually may be punished for not having that skill. Okay? So if it's not apparent, here's what executive functioning deficits could really look like in the real world. So Roz gave you an example of specifically about cognitive inflexibility in that last slide about autism, but here's some examples. Here's what this looks like. Kids act without thinking, they're interrupting others, overreact to small problems. They may be overwhelmed by large assignments and like not get started or stuff it in the bottom of their backpack. They don't notice the impact of their behavior on others, like they're not doing that self-monitoring. Difficulty calming down after an upset. Difficulty coming up with alternative solutions, like getting stuck on a process and not being able to adjust or take somebody's coaching to start it a different way. And low frustration tolerance. These are just examples, and it's from an awesome book that we love called Smart But Scattered by Peg Dawson. So there's lots of examples in there, but we actually pulled out a lot of those having to do with emotional control, because that's often forgotten. This isn't just a cognitive process. It also taps into those other emotion centers of the brain, having to do with managing how to control your emotions and get back to the goal-directed behavior. Okay. So kind of to wrap that idea up, there could be an initial problem, right, where a child may have difficulty figuring out multiple flexible solutions to a problem. How it appears to others, you could say, oh, that kid's really controlling, really rigid, or they're pushing my buttons. And what could really result from that over time, after you get that feedback, is the kids really feel frustrated. They may act out. They may develop what we call learned helplessness, where they're kind of like, I'll never win, right? And they're not really willing to keep trying when they get that message that they're feeling. Another example could be a kid may have really poor planning, sequencing, initiating, follow-through. Might be a little cut off, sorry about that. But how it appears to maybe an outsider who maybe not be thinking through that lens about executive functioning skills is that kids look lazy, unmotivated, unwilling, obstinate. And the result for a child could be that they could really feel blindsided, like, I don't even know what to do here. I don't even know how to get started. They may not understand and try to mask the fact they don't understand. That could look like a behavioral outburst, for example. Saying, I'm not going to school anymore. I'm not doing my homework anymore. You can't make me, right? Because it feels like failure every time. Okay. So we really want to kind of encourage that reframing of you guys now in the know, right? Of really thinking that a child won't do something, to really changing it to thinking about how it's a possibility that without support, they really can't right now. Okay. All right. So, and there's all kinds of resources and strategies for intervention, but this is a slide that has kind of our favorite. And then in the end of your packet, there's a resource page that has the list of these titles. So a lot of the ideas we have came from these resources. A quick overview of the research is not awesome. I don't know how else to say that. Anyway, so there's a lot of people trying to do lots of really good interventions out there. Usually these, they're well advertised in some way. In others, they're really early research stages and not implemented yet. So I can't say, oh, go get this product. It's the best. And it's the most research-based effective intervention. Unfortunately, there's not a lot out there that's really research-based. It's tried and tested. But what there is, it usually looks like this. There's some computerized training programs out there. They've been sort of tested in the research. What really seems to be the case is that they improve your ability to complete that company's task in the future. Right? Okay. So I don't know if it's too great, right? There's attention training interventions for young kids to help with sustained attention. There's computerized and non-computerized games that are trying to think of a good one that's non-computerized. Usually having to do with multiple people doing a goal-directed behavior and like taking turns and inhibiting response. I can't really say too much about them because I don't actually know what the tasks were. I just have research that says these have been tested. So I don't know. I guess I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because I'm not sure. I'm not convinced it's a way to go. Okay. Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Martial arts and mindfulness-based practice is actually pretty well researched. It's actually kind of a go-to intervention for kids. The problem is you have to kind of continually challenge or use these. You can't just kind of get a 3-day training on it or use it once a week for 10 weeks. It seems to be that you really have to get updated intervention to kind of keep your executive functioning skills on the tests they give you high. Okay. All right. Aerobic exercise. By the way, in some of these studies, they really had just one event of aerobic exercise that was really intense, like a bunch of jumping jacks, and then they did the task again, and it proved really that what that does is get the blood flow to your brain. So I'm not sure it's so great just for executive functioning. You really have to get that kid to, I don't know, do the treadmill while they're doing homework or run really hard to get it to go. I'm not really sure if there's maybe a ton of information out there about how to really use that intervention. The best ones out there are really these add-on classroom activities like the Tools of the Mind intervention I mentioned earlier that's in a preschool setting. There's also something called PATHS, which is actually a local intervention. Some researchers at University of Washington, Couchet and Greenberg, they've since moved on, developed this. It's called Promoting Alternative Thinking Strategies. That will remind you of cognitive flexibility, but also has to do with a lot of social problem-solving interventions, and that's proved to be really, really effective in classroom settings. Okay.
So these are 4 general different types of strategies that are used to help people who have executive functioning challenges. And one approach is to actually teach the skill that is missing, or that is the child is having difficulty with. And we keep saying child, but it could also be teenager, young adult. And so some examples of skills that you can teach, a lot of interventions are focused on increasing that cognitive flexibility, like the PATH model, as well as self-monitoring. You can help teach kids how to keep track of how they're doing and reevaluate how they're doing and how they might approach it differently. And in a couple of slides, I'll show an example of how that might be done. And then another strategy would be to help someone learn how to compensate for executive functioning deficits. So we've mentioned several times now about using some kind of external support. So often that external support might come in the form of another person. That might be the teacher or the parent for a child. But then the goal is for the individual to start to become more independent in their use of strategies. So learning how to use worksheets that help them walk through a problem, or use a calendar, or make a to-do list and then prioritize the things that they need to do. And then the goal being that they would need less and less help doing that, and it would become more of an automatic process as they got older. Another way to do it is to address executive functioning challenges is more through the environment. And so you might have environmental accommodations, and that might be allowing someone to take a test in a different room, or putting up, sometimes I see in elementary school classes, they put up blinders so that kids aren't distracted by other students while they're working independently. And in some cases, if accommodations don't work, there might just be environments that are avoided because it just causes too much of that executive functioning overload. But the goal and the hope would be that the individual can learn strategies or compensatory mechanisms, and there can be some accommodations so that environments that maybe were once avoided are more tolerable, and the individual's more successful in those environments. So it's both, it's not just about really I wanted to point out with this, that it's not just about the individual and them learning the skills, but it can also come from environmental supports as well. And so some common elements that we see in most interventions, the use of those external supports, and then rewarding the use of those external supports. So initially when we start to teach executive functions or teach compensatory strategies, the individual's really not necessarily so motivated to use them because it just seems like more work. And so they might resist. And so trying to increase that motivation by incorporating a reward. And then the hope is that over time, it gets more of a routine. They start to see that it helps them. It helps them be successful. They feel positive about it, and then so that itself becomes rewarding. A lot of these interventions increase structure. The more structure you have, the easier it is to know what to focus your attention on, to remember the steps involved in something. You don't have to keep track of as much information in your working memory because you're not multitasking and all over the place, but it's clear what you're supposed to do first and then next because you have that structure built in. Decreasing distractions, it's similar. It helps you focus, can also help you self-monitor because it helps you think about what you're doing and not think about what else is going on in your environment. And then a lot of these interventions, like I already said, provides a lot of support initially until you see that the individual's really getting the skill, and then you fade out that support. Oh, and then this was, right, I didn't actually read that. The increased support in situations where demands are for executive functions likely outweigh the ability. So sometimes you might think an individual, they're really successful in one situation, and you think, oh, that's great, they're really showing a lot of progress, they're using these strategies, but maybe in another situation, that demand is just so much greater that you might see that overload again. So you kind of sometimes have to anticipate, okay, what executive functioning skills are going to be required in this situation? How are they doing with that? Are there going to be things in the environment that are making it hard for them to implement the skills that they do have? And how can we increase the support in those situations? So to just give an example of one specific type of approach is the goal, plan, do, review approach. And this is the idea that it breaks, it helps you achieve a goal as well as helps you practice self-monitoring and planning and organizing in a very structured, systematic way. So the first step is to identify what the goal is, what is it that you want to do, and then identify, okay, what is your plan? How will you do it? And initially it might just be a brainstorm. You might just dump a lot of ideas out and then try to figure out what the steps are and then rearrange them, prioritize them, figure out what it makes sense to do first. And then it also forces you to think about, okay, if these are the steps, do I have the materials I need to actually get them done? So in our example of planning to get together with your friend, you want to call them. Okay, I found my phone, I have my phone, but do I have their number? So it's helping you think through all of those things so that you're successful when you actually go to initiate and you don't just try it but get discouraged. And then it also builds in practicing time management. So how long do you think it will take? And sort of anticipating that. Then you do it. What are the steps? You go through your steps. You keep track of how long it actually took you. And so when you go to review and you ask yourself, how well did it work? You can figure out, was there a better way to do it? Did I misjudge how much time it would take? So this is a really systematic, structured approach, which uses a external support. So not only are you asking yourself these questions in your head, initially you have this guideline to help you walk through the steps. And so you can see here that it has those different elements. It also has, in the middle there, a prediction. But both the prediction and the review there are designed to help an individual learn to self-monitor. So they are forced to think about the materials and equipment. Do I have what I need? What are the steps? How well will I do? How much will I get done? And then they do it. And one of the things that's helpful is figuring out, okay, what problems came up? What were the obstacles? What didn't I anticipate? And then come up with solutions. So you're practicing that cognitive flexibility. Then you review yourself. How did I do? What worked? What didn't work? And what could I do differently next time? So it seems like a lot of work. But initially, obviously, it's helpful if someone walks the individual through this and really helps them with it. Because just even coming up with those ideas, what are the steps? What are the materials I need? Sometimes people, just coming up with more than one or two things, they're like, well, I just want to call my friend. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call my friend. And it can, just thinking of those steps could be hard, so it can be helpful to help them initially just break it down. Over time, people can become more independent in their use of the worksheets, and then eventually it becomes more of just an automatic cognitive process. You think more immediately about materials and steps without actually needing this in front of you. So that's, yes. So thank you. Rachel just pointed out the reason why we added it to our presentation, but it's not in yours, is because it is copyrighted and we didn't want to get in trouble. But still wanted to share it with you. All right. So I was just going to say, so that's just one example. There's a lot of strategies like that that use similar ideas in terms of how to implement more structure and how to walk people through these steps, but they're kind of all similar like that.
Okay, so, being psychologists, we like to think about all kinds of ways you can think about intervention. And one of the most common questions are families saying, what are some ideas I could do with my kid and myself? So this is the slide that that is to kind of prompt us to talk about that. My favorite idea is cooking, okay? So just take a step back, right? You might be thinking to yourself, oh, executive functioning is hard, and gosh, a lot of these sound like me. And you might say, well, I'm not great at all these things. Am I equipped to kind of coach my kid through this kind of thing? Part of your job is, as your child grows, is to kind of take the burden as their brain CEO or their secretary. You probably already feel like that. But over time, parents can really help kind of scaffold tasks or model to their kid, hey, these are the compensatory strategies I use to kind of manage working, taking care of the household, those kinds of things. So you might think through, like, what are things that come naturally as skills to me, and what are things that I probably kind of export and use other strategies to kind of help me get through the day, the week, jobs, all that kind of thing. Okay. By the way, if anyone has ever hired a professional organizer, that's a good compensatory strategy, right? That would be a good example. Okay. And you might not use any of these things at all and find that you have a lot of executive functioning overload. All right. So anyway, this slide contains ideas for some kind of naturalistic interventions. So in cooking, which is like my favorite thing to recommend, I actually don't really like cooking, but I love it because it addresses all this stuff. So in order to kind of have those like really tasty cookies, we'll say baking because actually that's really precise. You need to be able to read the whole recipe, right? So plan, heat up the oven ahead of time, which I forget is always to take the eggs and put them at room temperature. I don't know if you've ever seen that in recipes, but who remembers that? You got to get your ingredients, organize it, know what you have in the pantry, make sure it's fresh. Follow multi-step directions, right? So you got to initiate a plan. You got to use working memory as you go from like your recipe to the oven or to the bowl or add things in. You got to remember what step you're on. All right. You got to remember where you are in the process. Like you don't add salt in twice. That would be pretty bad. Ruin your cookies. You need to kind of self-monitor, and it requires a lot of sustained attention, right? Because it's a task that takes a lot of time. So that's why I love cooking as an example. The other picture here is two kids on a play date, right? Or social outings. I don't know, play dates kind of go out of style of, I don't know what age, 6 or so. But, social outings and environments can really be set up so the child can have support at first. If you made the list of how to call a friend, you could pull that out and you could help your kid do the same thing, right? So as an adult, you're really acting as your kid's CEO, right? You're acting as their worksheet in a way, right? You're helping them plan, think, act, do, revise, right? So this could include kids in the planning of social dates, figuring out what are you going to do, what would you have fun doing, and then allow them to gradually take responsibility for certain aspects of it as they end up being able to do some of these skills for themselves. All right. Somebody on the external satellite site asked about IEPs. Actually, there's a lot of times that I see IEPs have executive functioning skills embedded in them. So you might be saying, oh gosh, I really want my kid at school to have some good skill building in this area. It may be the case that that's already happening if your child has an individualized education plan. All right, so this could look like supports for organization, even school-wide sometimes, like I mentioned, those calendars and systems that sometimes schools kind of implement as a school-wide requirement. behavior rewards for initiating tasks. So if you can get started within the first minute and you can work for 5 minutes, you can have time out to have a preferred activity or item for a few minutes, and then you get back to work. That actually also is a good recommendation to help build sustained attention, where kids work for shorter periods with reward and they eventually add more time. Breaking things down into smaller parts like big assignments, having kids figure out the steps to achieve that goal and write on the counter like rough draft 2, revision, final draft, all that kind of thing. Planning and time management can often be, these are typical things found in IEPs. Sustained attention I told you about, and then providing visual cues to help kids attend. Another thing not on the list is sometimes kids will have little rubrics for specific assignments, like taped to their desk, to kind of remind them, oh, okay, so I've got to write this, I've got to add a picture, I'm going to look over my work, and I'm going to turn it in. Or for older kids, maybe there's certain grade requirements for you got to have all these elements included in your essay for it to be counted as a full, complete assignment. So those are some strategies that can happen at school. Here's a list of selected resources, but I'm actually going to go back to that picture of those books and kind of leave it there because I think those are, the 5 or 6 best books in our humble opinion. And so this is a time we are happy to take questions.
I do. Oh my goodness. Do I?
Go ahead. Somebody in the satellite site?
Oops. Yeah.
All right.
Sorry.
Anyone at one of the satellite sites have a question?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
So,
Just go ahead.
okay. Well, my question was, when we talk about executive functioning, would you say that person doesn't have an awareness when we talk about that time or that time management? So is it that they don't have an awareness of time, or they aren't cognizant of that? What is missing that makes that such a difficult, it makes it really difficult for him to attend to?
So your question, I think, was about what's the breakdown in skill related to the time management component, and
Right.
The second part was, what was the other one? Oh, okay, for time management. So it's more about I think mistaking how long you think something will take. So a math assignment, right? Okay. Maybe you should take 20 minutes or something. And the kid will think, I can get this done in order to play my video games or watch my TV show that starts at this time. So kids kind of mismanage and misestimate, poorly estimate how long something should take.
Right.
And then they kind of mess up the chain reaction of events that happen after that. Like, how long will it take me to get my backpack ready for the school day? And by then, the bus left the bus stop, right? So it's that kind of breakdown.
Absolutely.
It might not be so much about reading time. So this is assuming a kid knows time.
Right. And so
I was just going to add that I actually don't know the research about this in kids with ASD, but in ADHD, I think there is actually a fair amount of research that shows that they do just have poor time management skills. So they just have, I should rephrase that. They have difficulty estimating how much time has passed, and so their sense of time isn't as well developed. And so when they think, I've been doing this, I've been playing this video game for 5 minutes, they've actually been playing for like a half hour. So I don't know if that's also the same in autism spectrum disorder, but it's possible.
yeah, because he's been diagnosed as having both ADHD and autism. So I wonder if it's just all autism versus the other, but that's something I'll have to figure out later. But 'cause he just doesn't seem to have any, or isn't cognizant of time passing, or that so much time has lapsed. So yeah, just like you said.
Yeah, go ahead.
So my question is about working memory. In a 13-year-old, I noticed you mentioned a lot of supports, external supports you can use. Is there anything that you can do to improve working memory?
Oh man. So actually, I wish I had one of those books with me, because there's this whole one of the, what is it, the Smart the Scattered book? I'm trying to remember. So one of the books, I'll go back to that slide in a minute, but it has, I think it's the Smart but Scattered book. At the end of the book, it's got this great section where it's like, here's how working memory develops. Here are some ways you can help increase, using compensatory strategies mostly for a kid's working memory. Some of the research, like those CogMed computerized tasks, they actually specifically were for working memory only. So that's why it was hard for me to say these are great interventions, because it only addressed like that one skill. But that's actually one of the components that's been researched in some of those computerized tasks. I like to suggest literally a whiteboard. So you're jotting down bits of information to help you keep things online, so that you, like, steps in some directions, ideas you have for solving a problem, and then it helps you keep track of where you are in the process of answering something or solving a problem along the way. So kids at their desks sometimes have whiteboards to jot down quick ideas or figure out what they're going to say to answer a question. And if they're the third person called on, they'll still remember what they wanted to contribute. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
The kind of working memory that would help. But you may teach a skill one day and the very next day forgot completely.
Okay, yeah. So you were saying that that you may kind of teach a skill one day and the next day it's something that's gone. That is what we call, difficulty generalizing skills, right? So maybe in different environments, kids have trouble kind of tapping into strategies that have been taught or applying something they've learned to like the next event. That's kind of like beyond that working memory. But I think what we'd really suggest in that case is the repetition, right? So the intervention worksheet that Roz had given you with that rubric of plan, organize, try, and revise.
No, you don't just teach it once.
Right. You got to use that worksheet like a ton of times for it to become an internal dialogue.
So hi, we've been in therapies of all kinds for a long time, and he's only 5 now. But we've recently gotten diagnosis of ASD, ADHD, dyslexia, and dysgraphia. And it all seems, they're all different in some ways, but they're all similar in some ways. And I was just wondering, and I know you're suggesting some interventions and stuff, but how do I approach it from a therapeutic sort of way too, to get help and not be in 6 hours, or not maybe 6 hours, that'll happen, but 6 different therapies doing similar but different things? Any suggestions?
This is a tough one. I'm not sure if your microphone was on, so I'm just going to repeat the question just in case. So she was commenting that so if you have multiple diagnoses like ASD, ADHD, I think you said dyslexia and dysgraphia, and you're involved in different therapies to target each one of these, and you see overlap in different therapies, hopefully they're consistent with each other. You're not getting mixed messages. Sometimes that happens too, which just further complicates things. What do you do, and what's the best way to approach that? So then Rachel said that's a good question. That's a tough one. So my initial thought was you definitely want to well, I guess 2 things. One is that sometimes if you are getting the same message and those skills are getting supported in different environments, sometimes that can be really helpful because you're getting more repetition, and having it administered or having the interventions done by different people in different environments can sometimes help with that generalization as well. So the child's not just learning, oh, I do this with this person in this environment and that's it. So sometimes it can be helpful to be getting that message in different ways. On the other hand, if it's just, you don't want the child to burn out on therapy and you don't want to be spending extra resources, My other suggestion would be to try to promote dialogue between providers and trying to make sure people realize that this child's also getting that intervention with other people, and see if they can coordinate those services a little more. Did you have any?
I was just going to add that, I mean, I don't know your specific situation, but if you're involved in being taught what is being done in a therapy session, so that there's some parent intervention that can happen during the week that you're not seeing the provider, that's super important. So if that's not happening, I would suggest that does. And then the other thing is having really clear therapy goals in whatever therapies you're doing, so that you're clear, what exactly is my kid working on, and how will we know when we've achieved that or reached that next goal, and what will we add on at that point. So if that's not clear, it's your right as a patient, as a client, to say, what are our goals and how will we know we're going to get there, and what are you going to measure it with, and when will we be done at this point in our lives, right? It could be that at different milestones, entry to middle school, entry to high school, adulthood, there might be other times where you kind of re-engage in skill learning, and that might help with burnout to have breaks between two. So,
And if I could add one more thing to that, just because a lot of our participants here are parents, and from my experience working with lots of families, sometimes you get this idea that I've got to do everything, right? And when you get 4 different diagnoses like that, you're like, all right, I need 4 different therapists, and what we try to communicate is you don't have to do everything, and you really should just think about what's the priority, what are creating the primary obstacles. And really just kind of say, let's work on this for a little while and do what's ever going to be within your means, within your resources, so you're not driving yourself crazy, you're not driving your kid crazy, right? And really just kind of making it kind of an easier sort of thing to do. Okay? So, got a question now.
Hello, this is Carol Anacortes. Hello, Roz and Jim.
Hello.
And haven't met you, Rachel, but we were talking in our group. There's 3 of us here, and I could really feel. We could feel what the parent was talking about with all these different areas that they want to work with, and just kind of looking back. We sometimes have to step back and say, what is it that we want to accomplish, and maybe look at the naturalistic. And what would the child be doing if he was 5 and he didn't have those issues? So in other words, what about incorporating that in play therapy? Does he like to swim? Would you like him to be taught how to swim? Kicking the ball. Just all kinds of fun things. And that's just, I have to say from experience, when my daughter was 8 years old and I went to the psychologist who we're going to for a while, and I said, what kind of therapy is going to work on this summer? And she just looked at me very kindly and she said, go have fun. So I just want to pass that on.
I like that. Yeah, great recommendation.
Okay, I have a question. What will be your best suggestion for a child of 16 years old that he is not a self-starter? That's his main issue to start any project, especially at the school. And also for a simple instruction that we say at home, would you like to give me this? You have to tell it, it's in this corner, this column, all the directions, How he can be, try to be a kind of self-starter or thinking a little bit. What's your suggestion for that, please?
Did you have okay. Well, I was going to just, in case everyone didn't hear all that, I think the question is, how do you help a 16-year-old, for example, be a self-starter to do tasks that have multiple steps?
Yes.
Right? So maybe there's a breakdown from the time maybe a demand is placed and action happens. Is that your question?
Yes.
Okay. So putting motivation, getting them to do something. All right. That's a hard one. Motivating a teen. There's lots and lots of books about that. And it's probably the highest challenge in my job. So I always go to my handy recommendation of figuring out what they want and what they enjoy and what they'll work for. And even if it sounds totally unrelated to the task you may be teaching them, which is to start something, put it in place as a reinforcement for doing something that's non-preferred, like getting up and starting a project. if I'm trying to think of a good example, right? So if I was gonna say if the task demand is to start homework, it's probably you're lots of nodding of heads. It could be so I'd consider a lot of things, especially for kids that I would see, teenagers. Do they need downtime after school because they've been taxing their self-regulation systems and attention systems all day long, and the first thing they probably need to do is to decompress and have some non-demand time? I'd probably recommend that if it's not already happening. I'd save the real important and highly preferred activities for after work production, for homework time, for example. So maybe there's a timer set so that when it goes off, that's when a kid gets started. If they're able to get over to the table at that point, that's starting them to incrementally earn preferred activities or time doing something like, I don't know, video games or whatever their preferred activity is. So that itself can help kids kind of visually see how long do I have until I've got to get started, and just getting physically over to the space could be the first set of rewards you can give a kid, like points towards something, first few minutes of preferred video game, and then comes work production after that.
So you mean that first he needs to be a kind of stressed out, he will be relaxed, we can say, free time as they call,
Yeah,
okay.
I'd say downtime, but not a highly preferred activity. Save that as your carrot.
Yeah, but basically when the child is a kind of no stressed out, he's not able to think to start. You have to explain over and over. Once that he catch the idea, recently all his ideas are coming out, but his main issue, and I think for the future, he's not able to jump on that. He has no idea how to jump. He's not aggressive to do that. Most of us, we are, thinking so fast, okay, we need to do that,
Right. Yeah, and I think, it's such a complicated issue about the initiation, because there are so many things that can be impacting it. And it may be, the executive functioning piece with the just difficulty with task initiation, but there might also be other obstacles, like Rachel pointed out, just exhaustion and not having the mental resources to do something else, or it might be related to, I think you just said anxiety, like just worries about doing it wrong or something like that.
Correct.
Or it could be related to mood and just, not having that motivation, just feeling down. Or it could be related to other executive functions about just not having the materials that they need to get started, or not knowing how to take that first step. And so I think part of it is just figuring out what are those obstacles and what for that individual is making it challenging, or what couple of things are making it challenging, and then addressing those issues. Or it could be, I just thought of another example, distraction. They have the intent to get started, they have the motivation, but along the way they get sidetracked and do something else. So they might just be related to distractibility as well. So I think figuring out what is making it challenging, and then trying to address those things too.
But basically he was advised to have this kind of executive functional testing. Does he recommend it to be tested by a psychologist, or a psychiatrist has to do this kind of testing? Which is the best?
I think, some psychologists do neuropsych testing, not all of them. It just depends what their assessment training has been. And then there are specific neuropsychologists who have made this the primary area of focus.
But no a psychiatrist?
No, psychiatrists, they don't do any direct testing.
No.
But psychologist or neuropsychologist would be.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Hi, I just had a quick question. For the smart but scattered, if your child's a teen, would you jump to the second book? Or are there things in the first book that aren't in the second book, so you should have both?
I think the teen one, it includes a lot of the same skills, but then presents them in a way that I think teenagers relate more to teenagers, and they just, it resonates better with them. So I like that. I think the teen book's a great addition. It came out relatively recently. The Smart but Scattered has been around a while, and then this was a extension of it, and it's really good.
They probably have those books in the resource center upstairs if you wanted to see.
I wonder if they do. Oh, yeah. Great idea. So, just in case, because that was good information, although I guess external sites, if you happen to be in the hospital someday, or in town, I guess, there's a resource center upstairs in the hospital, and it was suggested that maybe some of these books, especially the Smart but Scattered, because it's a pretty popular book, might be available there for you to check out. So
there's a resource center up on the
I don't know what floor it's on.
Oh.
Just go up.
I would ask somebody.
Yeah, if you ask the people at the check-in desk, they would.
I might make another plug because there's Carol was talking, and there's the Autism Outreach Project, and they have a lending library. We're just going to say this, and you could get probably any of these books through contacting the Autism Outreach Project. And what they'll do is they'll send you the book, and you just pay for postage to get it back. So that's these books and lots of other great books. So Autism Outreach Project, great resource for our state.
And the Unstuck and On Target book is a school-based curriculum for groups. So that wouldn't necessarily be something that you'd get and then implement with your child at home. But others, if your child's teacher is looking for a resource, that's a really well-researched, evidence-based intervention. And then the other ones are ones that would be useful one-on-one. Did you have a question?
I'm here for myself in order to be able to help my kids because I have severe problems with this. Okay. And which of these books for me? Right. Which would be the, because I would read them all.
I really would. What would you say?
Yeah, I like, that one's pretty good too, the executive skills in children and adolescents.
Let me put it on slideshow. Whoops, sorry. Oops. So there's checklists in here. It's in the Smart but Scattered books that say, do you have difficulty with estimating time for things and figuring out how to allocate resources and plan things? Are you late to things a lot? And it's like this little self checklist. That might be helpful to be like to kind of hone in on like maybe 2 or 3 areas that may be especially difficult that you find come up and especially interfere with doing a job or getting together with people or parenting, right? Yeah. Okay, so I would even start with that because I like those little checklists.
Smart.
The Smart but Scattered series, just go for the teen one. Good enough.
I love the kids' books because they tend to be colorful and bright and big pictures and all of that.
Which one's really what? So the Executive Functioning Workbook on the very right lower, that's cool. Actually a really nice workbook. It's got awesome
it's very
kid
friendly.
Yeah.
It's the only one that is in color. I think the kid one should all be in color, but yeah, it's the only one that's in color and has nice graphics and is very kid friendly.
Oh, me friendly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think any of the worksheets could probably be helpful because it helps structure you and helps focus you. Yeah.
Hi. My question is regarding it seems to me many of the kids or people in general with some sort of autism spectrum disorder have also at the same time some sort of hypersensitivity and being bothered by noises or by light. And my question is like, if the interventions and all of these books that you mention here, or the resources, do address that, and if you have interventions that address that, because for example, when you talk about like these executive skills in the computer, I think somehow, anyways, if you are looking at the computer and you have all of these light stimuli, and you have someone who is sensitive to all of that light, you start being overwhelmed by all of this, overload of stimuli in the brain. Or the same thing with sound, for example. It's like they talk too fast, or the way they talk, the vocabulary they use is a vocabulary that overwhelms.
Yeah, and that's definitely, that would be another example of like an obstacle that might come up that might interfere with initiation because you're just so overwhelmed by sensory in the environment. I don't know if any of these interventions actually address that directly? Do you?
I would
don't
go
think
with
so.
Coaching and worksheet use, I guess, is what I would go for. I don't know. Does that even make sense?
Yeah, it's kind of two. You're right. It's two separate. I mean, you can target the sensory issues, and so if you find that that's what's interfering with, implementation of some of the executive functioning skills or learning new strategies, that can you can have accommodations to help with sensory sensitivities, and that's something that occupational therapists do a lot. But I feel like there isn't a ton of overlap between these interventions and those sorts of approaches, although using them together might be helpful. Yeah, let's do one more question from the external sites, and then we'll wrap up because I think we're a little bit over time. Yeah.
Yeah, my only other question was about, it goes back to that sensory overload, and because it seems like when he's in middle school now, and when he starts class or when the period starts, there's a lot of discussion about the lesson goal or the lesson objective. And by the time that 15-20 minute discussion is done, he's done too. He is disengaged. He's ready just to walk out, really. So, it goes back to just that overstimulation and how to help him. So that's a conversation you have to have with a teacher, in other words, so to eliminate all of that, I guess, lag time before he gets started.
Right.
Because it goes back to that sensory overload. Is that what she was talking about there?
Absolutely, and I think it's great that you're picking up on that is a factor in this situation, because sometimes people see, once they get started on actually doing the work, he just doesn't want to do it, he's avoiding, but to actually realize that, he's reached his maximum after 15 minutes and all that talking, and so that's the first step, is figuring out what's contributing, and then figuring out, okay, what are the accommodations that can be made. Maybe he pays attention for the teacher, gives him a handout of what the main points are, pays attention for a few minutes, and then he can, put on some headphones and do something else, or get started. Yeah, exactly. So that's a good point, because that can make it difficult then. Even if he has the executive functioning skill of initiation and planning, he can't do it because he's just so exhausted already.
Yeah, by that time.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and hope it was helpful.